Fareed Qassem watched through the window as the burning wreckage of the American convoy sent black smoke into the morning scuffed him. He didn't flinch. He smiled. 3 soldiers were dead, their bodies still inside the twisted metal, and he turned away from the window before the smoke even began to thin, already thinking about the next bomb, the next road, the next morning he could ruin. That smile, that slow, deliberate turn away from death he caused, that is where the story begins. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end. What happens next is something you will not see coming. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter had not slept in 31 hours. That wasn't unusual. Sleep in her line of work was a luxury you negotiated with your body the same way you negotiated everything else in a war zone, carefully, partially, and never with any guarantee of getting what you asked for. She had learned to function on edges, on margins, on the thin ribbon of alertness that lives somewhere between exhaustion and focus, and she had learned to live there so completely that it had stopped feeling like deprivation and started feeling like home. She was lying flat on the eastern ridge of a mountain that didn't appear on any commercial map, in a country that had been grinding armies into dust for centuries, and she was doing what she did best. She was watching. Below her, through the glass of a Schmidt and Bender scope that had cost the United States government more than most people's cars, the compound sat in the bowl of the valley like something that had grown there naturally, all mud brick walls and hard angles, and the particular stillness that comes to places where people are very careful about being seen. 3 structures, 1 main building with a flat roof, 2 smaller outbuildings pressed against the northern wall. A courtyard that was empty, in the way courtyards are empty when someone has deliberately made sure nothing interesting is visible from above. Corporal Ryan Walker lay 2 feet to her left, his spotting scope steady, his breathing controlled in the way that took most people years to learn. Movement. Northeast corner, he said. His voice was barely a breath. I see him, Emily said. A single figure had crossed the sliver of open ground between the main building and the eastern outbuilding. Male, medium build, moving with the kind of casual confidence that told her he believed he was safe. He disappeared back into shadow before she could identify him. Not him, Ryan said. No, she agreed. They had been watching this compound for 3 days. 70 hours of lying still on a mountainside, rationing water, communicating in murmurs and hand signals, watching a mud brick compound in a valley that the locals called a place God had forgotten, though Emily suspected God had simply never been told about it. Their mission was Fareed Qassem, the bomb maker, the man whose hands had built the device that had killed Sergeant Marcus Webb and Corporals Daniel Ortiz and James Sutton 4 days ago on a road 12 miles south of where she was now lying. She hadn't known Webb well. She had known Ortiz. They had been in the same forward operating base for 6 weeks, and he had taught her a card trick she still couldn't figure out. And he had talked about his daughter in New Mexico, the way people talk about things they're afraid they might forget constantly, with a kind of desperate precision, naming specific details as if saying them out loud kept them real. His daughter's name was Sophia. She was 7. She liked horses and hated math and had recently lost her first tooth. Ortiz would not be going home to Sophia. Fareed Qassem would not be going home either. Not if Emily could help it. 52 hours on target, Ryan said quietly, more to himself than to her. You doing okay? I'm fine. You haven't eaten since yesterday. I said I'm fine, Ryan. He let it go. He always let it go when she used that particular tone, not cold exactly, but clipped. Focused. The tone that meant she was all the way inside the mission and the rest of the world, including his concern, needed to wait outside. She shifted her weight slightly, redistributing pressure across her elbows, and went back to watching. The thing about surveillance work that nobody tells you until you've done it is that it's not boring in the way people expect. It's not the passive boredom of waiting for a bus. It's an active, demanding boredom, the kind that requires your brain to remain fully engaged while your body remains completely still, scanning constantly for significance in a field of visual noise, asking yourself every 30 seconds whether what you're seeing means anything or nothing. Whether that shadow is a person, whether that movement is wind or intention, whether the pattern you think you're seeing is real or something your tired mind has assembled out of desperate need for something to make sense. Emily was good at this. She was by most accounts exceptionally good at this, better than anyone in her platoon, better than most people her evaluators had seen. Her commanding officer had once described her to another officer as pathologically patient, and she had taken it as the highest compliment she'd ever received. She had been watching for 70 hours, and in the last 2 hours, something had started to bother her. She couldn't name it yet. That happened sometimes. Her brain would register a pattern before it could translate the pattern into words. And there would be this low, persistent unease, like a sound at the edge of hearing that preceded understanding by sometimes minutes and sometimes hours. She had learned to respect that feeling, the way you learn to respect a dog that's going quiet in a place that should have dogs making noise. The absence of the expected was its own kind of signal. "Ryan," she said, "yeah. Walk me through the ridge lines again. North, then east, then south." He adjusted his spotting scope. North ridge still clear, nothing moving. East ridge same as before. South ridge, he paused. "What?" "Probably nothing." "Ryan, there's a cluster of rocks at the south ridge at about 11 o'clock from our current position, about 800 meters. There was a reflection about 20 minutes ago. I logged it as sun on quartz." Emily was already moving her scope to the south ridge without him finishing the sentence. She found the rocks. A natural outcropping, exactly the kind of place she would choose if she needed to hide and maintain a line of sight to the valley below. The kind of place she would choose. The reflection was gone. The rocks looked like rocks. Nothing moved. But something was wrong with the shadow distribution on the western face of the outcropping. The shadow was slightly too deep, slightly too regular. The kind of shadow that has geometry in a place where geometry shouldn't be. "That's not sun on quartz," she said. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure?" "No," she said, "but I'm not sure it isn't either." She pulled back to wide view and began a systematic scan of the ridgelines, really scanning the way she hadn't done since the first 12 hours when everything was new. Not looking for what she expected to see, looking for what she wasn't supposed to notice. 90 seconds. Then she found the second one. West Ridge, 850 meters. A gap between two large stones that had the wrong kind of darkness in it. The kind of darkness that has a shape. Her heart rate didn't spike. That was training. But something in her chest did something that wasn't quite settling. She kept scanning. The third one took 4 minutes to find. Northwest approach. The shadow of a dead tree that fell at a slightly wrong angle relative to the actual position of the sun. The shadow was real. The angle was wrong because the object casting part of it was not the tree. She stopped. She went back to the beginning. She looked again. "Ryan," she said, her voice was very steady. "How many snipers do you count?" He went quiet in the way that meant he was scanning. 90 seconds passed. 2 minutes. "I've got 2 confirmed, 1 probable," he said slowly. "Why are you asking me like that?" "Keep looking." Another 90 seconds. "Emily, keep looking." He did. 3 minutes later, Ryan Walker, who was not easily rattled, said in a voice that was barely keeping itself under control, 7. The words sat between them in the mountain air like something with weight. 7, Emily repeated. Not 1 sniper, not 2, not a pair of lookouts covering the obvious approach routes. 7 carefully positioned marksmen spread across the ridges and approaches of the valley, with the kind of deliberate geometry that told her this had not been arranged overnight. This had been planned. Someone had walked this valley and looked at it the way she looked at things and had placed 7 shooters in positions that were individually nearly invisible and collectively catastrophic. Every northern approach was covered. Every eastern route was trapped. The south ridge covered the most likely extraction point, and the position she and Ryan were lying in, the position she had selected as the best overwatch location in the entire valley, was not, she realized with a cold rush of understanding, uncovered. The West Ridge sniper had a partial line of sight to their location. They had been there for 70 hours, and the West Ridge sniper had been watching them the same way they had been watching the compound. "We have to report this," Ryan said. "I know. This changes everything. They can't send the assault team in here with—" "I know, Ryan." She was already on the radio. The response from command came back in 4 minutes, which was fast, which told her they already knew something was wrong even before she called. The assault team, 8 Navy SEALs operating under call sign Phantom, was already on approach, 40 minutes out. "Tell them to hold," she said. Staff Sergeant, the intelligence window is narrow. If Qasem moves, tell them to hold and I will brief the situation when they arrive. There was a pause on the other end that lasted exactly long enough to communicate that the person on the other end did not like this, but was going to comply because she had said it with the right kind of authority. Copy that, Carter. Holding for your brief. She put down the radio. Ryan was looking at her. 7 snipers, M, he said. We've got 2 confirmed, 5 probable. You want to brief the SEALs on 7 snipers? Yes. And then what? We call an air support. We abort the mission. Team, I don't know yet, she said. I'm working on it. She went back to her scope. She scanned the valley, the compound, the ridge lines, the 7 positions. She was more confident in 6 of them. Now the 7th still nagging at her as probable rather than confirmed. But her gut had been telling her certain things for 2 hours, and her gut had a better track record than she liked to admit. She thought about the geometry, the distances, the angles, the timing. She thought about Marcus Webb, about Daniel Ortiz, about Sophia in New Mexico, who was 7 years old and liked horses and had recently lost her first tooth. She thought about 8 SEALs walking into this valley with 7 marksmen waiting for them, and she thought about how that ended, and she knew exactly how it ended because she had spent years learning exactly how it ended. The SEALs arrived at her position 38 minutes later, which was 2 minutes ahead of the estimated hold time because SEALs move like that. Their commander was a lieutenant commander named Bryce Harlan. She had worked with his team once before briefly, and she knew him to be a careful man underneath the particular brand of aggression that SEAL teams wore like a uniform. He crawled up beside her without a word and looked through his own optics at the valley below. She let him look for 90 seconds before she spoke. I've got 7 confirmed sniper positions, she said. 2 are definite, the other 5 are high confidence. All ridge lines are covered. All approach routes are trapped. Your team hits that valley floor, you're inside effective range of all 7 before you get within 300 meters of the objective. Harlan was quiet. She waited. He lowered his optics. He looked at her. He looked back at the valley. Then he said very quietly in a voice that surprised her, not because of what the words were, but because of the way he said them with the kind of honesty that takes real courage to offer too many snipers. She had expected argument. She had prepared for argument, the things senior men with impressive credentials sometimes did when a junior female Marine presented them with information they didn't want to have. She had built herself up for the conversation the way you brace for a physical impact. She hadn't prepared for agreement. Yeah, she said. We go in anyway, Harlan said. Command won't call it. The intelligence on this location expires in 6 hours, and there's a time-sensitive attack being planned that we cannot. He stopped, compressed whatever he was feeling into something smaller and harder, and continued. We go in. That's the order. I know. So tell me what we're looking at. She told him. She walked him through every position, every estimated range, every angle of fire, and how they overlapped the gaps in coverage and where they weren't gaps, but places where the coverage was simply less obvious. She told him about the timing, how long it would take the enemy shooters to respond once the assault started, and what the response pattern would likely look like. Harlan listened, the way good commanders listen completely without interrupting filing things, without reacting to them until he had the whole picture. When she was done, he said, 6 of your guys are dead before my team reaches the objective. Yes, she said. Minimum. Yes. He looked at the valley again. For a long time. What do we do? Ryan asked, and she noticed he'd asked her, not Harlan, and she noticed Harlan noticed that too. Emily looked through her scope. She was counting. She was measuring. She was running calculations in her head that weren't really calculations. They were something more intuitive than that, something that lived in the part of her brain that had spent years absorbing what distance and elevation and wind and human physiology could and couldn't do. And right now, that part of her brain was doing something she hadn't asked it to do. It was solving for the problem. It was telling her something was possible, not certain, not safe, not anything that belonged in a textbook or a formal operations plan, but possible. Give me 12 minutes, she said. Harlan turned and looked at her. Ryan turned and looked at her. The two of them looked at her the same way with the particular expression of people who have heard something so far outside the range of expected that their brains are running a full second behind trying to process it. Say that again, Harlan said. Give me 12 minutes, Emily said. She had not raised her voice. She had not changed her tone. She said it the way she said everything when she was completely certain of something flat and clear and without decoration. Hold your team at this position for 12 minutes. I will clear the ridge lines. When 12 minutes are up, your team moves. Harlan stared at her. She met his eyes and did not look away. 7 snipers, he said. Not a question. A reminder. I know how many there are. In 12 minutes. Yes. Undetected, because if any one of those shooters sounds an alarm or fires before your sequence is complete, I know what happens if they sound an alarm, she said. I also know what happens if your team walks into that valley without me doing this first. Harlan was quiet for a long time, long enough that Ryan shifted slightly beside her the way people shift when they're uncomfortable with silence. Then Harlan said, "What do you need the 12 minutes, she said, and for your team to be ready to move the second the 12th minute is up. No delays, no waiting to confirm. When I tell you to move, you move." Harlan looked at her one more time. "If this goes wrong," he started. "If it goes wrong," Emily said, "it won't matter who gets blamed." Another silence. Then Harlan made a sound in his throat that was not quite agreement and not quite anything else. 12 minutes, he said. Don't waste them. Emily turned back to her scope. She looked at the first position, the South Ridge 800 meters, the one she'd found first. She ran the angle. She checked the wind, which was 3 miles per hour from the northwest, which meant almost nothing at this range, but almost nothing was not nothing. She breathed in. She breathed out. Her mind went quiet in the particular way it went quiet when everything else stopped being important. Ryan settled beside her. She could feel him, not see him. Feel him reaching the same stillness. His hand moved to his notebook, his wind meter, his own scope. "You know this is insane," he said softly. "I know. 7 targets, 12 minutes. Every shot has to be clean. No alarm, no." "Ryan." "Yeah. I need you to spot, not narrate." He was quiet. Then South Ridge, 812 meters, wind at 3 from northwest. Target is stationary. She had the crosshairs on the South Ridge position. The geometry was right. The shadow had resolved itself in the last hour into something with clear human shape, someone lying in exactly the hide she would have chosen, invisible to anything but the most patient observation. And she had been patient. She breathed in, breathed out. The 12 minutes began. And Emily Carter started doing something that nobody, not Harlan, not Ryan, not the 7 men who did not yet know she was there, believed it was possible. She started winning. The first minute passed in silence, not the comfortable silence of people waiting together, the brittle razor-edged silence of people who know that every second has a price attachment to it, and they are spending those seconds on something that cannot be refunded if it goes wrong. Ryan Walker had stopped breathing in the way people stop breathing when they are trying not to exist. His eye was pressed to the spotting scope. His hand was flat against the ground. He had logged the wind 3 miles per hour northwest, consistent, and he had confirmed the range 812 meters. And he had done everything a spotter does to give a shooter the best possible chance. And now he was doing the thing that was hardest for him, which was nothing, which was waiting and trusting. Emily's world had compressed to a circle of glass 30 millimeters in diameter. Inside that circle, a man was lying behind a natural rock formation on the South Ridge, positioned with the kind of professional care that told her he had done this before. He was good. She acknowledged that without emotion, the way you acknowledge the weight of something before you lift it. He was good, and he was invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 70 hours learning the specific grammar of this valley. He had a rifle that was pointed at the place where 8 Navy SEALs were currently waiting. He believed he was safe. He was wrong. Emily exhaled the last half of a breath she had been carrying for 4 seconds, and in the stillness that followed, in that biological pause between heartbeats, where the body is briefly perfectly still, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. The sound crossed the valley and came back as an echo, but by the time it returned, there was nothing to answer it. The shape behind the rocks on the South Ridge was no longer a shape. It was just rocks. "Target down," Ryan said. His voice was absolutely flat. He was already moving to the second position. 01 complete, 11 minutes, 40 seconds remaining. Emily cycled the bolt without taking her eye from the scope. Brass ejected, round chambered. She was already swinging to the second position, East Ridge, 900 meters. Slight elevation advantage over her current position, which complicated the angle in ways she had already calculated and filed and was now executing. East Ridge 904 meters, Ryan said. Wind unchanged. Target is a half-second pause. Target is stationary. She was already on him. The second shooter had chosen a deeper hide than the first, more patient or more experienced, or both. The visual signature was almost nothing. Almost was not the same as nothing. She fired. Target down, Ryan said. 02 complete, 11 minutes, 10 seconds. Harlan's voice came through the earpiece she was wearing. Low controlled, but carrying something underneath it that wasn't quite calm. Carter, talk to me. 2 down, she said. She was moving to the third position. Stay off this channel unless I call you. There was a pause. Then copy. She didn't think about Harlan. She thought about the third position, northwest approach, the dead tree, with the wrong shadow. Estimated 780 meters. The shortest shot in the sequence, which made it simultaneously easier and more dangerous, because closer also meant louder. Relatively speaking, and louder meant a fractionally higher chance of something carrying across the valley to the remaining shooters in a way they would recognize. Northwest approach, Ryan said. 778, wind is picking up slightly. 4 miles per hour, call it 4.2. She made the adjustment. Not a calculation, not anymore. Something more built in than calculation. The adjustment happened in the same way you adjust your balance walking on uneven ground without consciously deciding to the body already knowing what the mind is still catching up to. She fired. The echo off the northern rock face was slightly different with this one, slightly sharper. She registered it and filed it and kept moving. Target down, Ryan said, and there was something in his voice now. Not celebration, but a kind of controlled disbelief. The voice of someone watching something happen that they believe was possible only in theory and are now confronting as reality. 03 complete, 10 minutes, 30 seconds. 3 down, 4 remaining. No alarms, no radio chatter from the valley below, no indication that anything had changed. She was inside the sequence now, that mental state that athletes call flow and soldiers call the zone, and Emily had never bothered to name because naming it felt like it might break it. Everything outside the scope had stopped being real. There was the crosshair. There was the target. There was the distance and the wind and the elevation and the timing. Everything else was interference. Northeast approach, Ryan said, 1035 meters. She was already looking. The northeast position was the one that had taken her the longest to identify during the initial scan. The hide was nearly perfect, using a natural depression in the terrain that would be completely invisible from any ground-level observation point and nearly invisible from her elevated position. She had found it through behavior rather than visual signature. A slight displacement of loose stones that couldn't have been wind because the wind had been from the northwest for 3 days and the stones were displaced to the northwest, which meant someone had moved through that position from the east. The shooter hadn't moved since she'd identified the hide. He was patient too. They all were. Wind at 4 from northwest, Ryan said. Target is another pause, slightly longer. I'm having trouble confirming this one, M. The depression changes the shadow pattern. I have him, she said. You sure I have him? She repeated. She did. The specific quality of the stillness in that depression was different from the quality of stillness in an empty depression. It was occupied stillness, the stillness of something that was working very hard not to exist. She fired. Nothing. The depression didn't change. Ryan said nothing for 2 full seconds, which was a very long time given what they were doing, and then, I don't have confirmation. Emily didn't change anything. She kept the crosshair on the position and she watched, and she counted 1, 2, 3, and then something shifted in the depression. A small movement, the involuntary movement of a body that is no longer under conscious control. Target down, Ryan said, and his voice was quieter now. The disbelief fully replaced by something else, something closer to reverence, which made her slightly uncomfortable. Because she didn't want reverence right now, she wanted the next position. 04 complete, 9 minutes, 5 seconds. 4 down, 3 remaining. Harlan's voice again. Carter, you're at the halfway point. Status. 4 down, 3 remaining, she said. I said stay off this channel. I have 8 men who are... Commander? She said it very quietly, but the way she said it made him stop. I am aware of what you have. Stay off this channel. When I'm done, I will tell you. Another pause. Longer this time. Copy, he said, and he stayed off the channel. She moved to the fifth position, the western ridge, the one that had the partial line of sight to her and Ryan's position. This was the one she had found second, and it was the one she had been most aware of for the last several hours, with the particular heightened awareness you have for a threat that is looking in your direction. 860 meters, partially obscured by the natural curvature of the ridge at this range, which meant her angle was not clean. She would be shooting through a gap in the terrain feature that was approximately 3 degrees of arc wide. 3 degrees was enough, barely but enough. West Ridge, Ryan said, 862 meters. The gap narrows your angle significantly. You have approximately, I know the gap, she said, 3 degrees of arc. If you're off by Ryan, he stopped. She breathed. The gap was real. The angle was difficult. The margin for error was smaller than anything else in the sequence. And she was 5 shots into a sequence that had already asked more of her than most engagements asked of most people. And she was going to be honest with herself for exactly 1 second. She was tired. Her arms had been braced in the same position for nearly 10 minutes. Her eyes were burning from the sustained focus. The exhaustion she had been managing for 31 hours had found a small crack in the wall she had built against it and was pushing through. She noticed all of this. She filed it. She did not allow it to mean anything. She fired through the gap. The sound that came back from the west ridge was slightly wrong, a secondary impact she hadn't expected the round clipping rock at the edge of the gap before it reached the target. West Ridge, Ryan said, and his voice had changed completely. I have movement. He's moving or down. Moving, and then the West Ridge sniper fired. The round passed so close to Ryan's position that Emily heard it, not the impact, but the specific sound of a bullet's passage that you only hear when it's within inches, a sound like a whip cracked next to your ear. Ryan flinched. The movement was involuntary and small, and he controlled it in under a second, but it had happened. You okay? She said. Yeah. His voice was a little rough. Yeah, are you hit? No, I'm not hit. He was breathing harder now. He's down, but I don't know for how long. He may have signaled if he had a radio alert set up, if there's any kind of, how long do I have? I don't know. Best estimate, 30 seconds. Maybe, if he had a check-in protocol, if the others are expecting. She was already moving to the 6th position. 7 minutes, 18 seconds remaining. 2 enemy shooters left, the south-southwest position in the eastern plateau. She had been planning to take the south-southwest first because the angle was cleaner. But if the West Ridge shooter had triggered any kind of alarm protocol, the south-southwest position would be the first one to respond, which meant the south-southwest position might move. And a moving target at this range in deteriorating time conditions was a different problem entirely from a stationary one. She went to the south-southwest position. South-southwest, Ryan said, and he had recovered. His voice was back steady again. 940 wind is shifting. We're getting a crosswind now, left to right, approximately. Call it. 6 miles per hour, 7 maybe. It's variable. Variable wind at 940 meters was a serious problem. Variable wind meant you were shooting at a moving target you couldn't see. The wind itself was the target, and it had no consistent shape. You couldn't calculate it. You could only read it in real time in the specific way the vegetation moved, in the way the air felt on the exposed skin of your hands, and you made a judgment that was partly science and partly something else entirely, something that didn't have a clean name. Emily read the wind. She fired. Target down, Ryan said. 06 complete. 7 minutes, 2 seconds. 1 remaining. She moved to the eastern plateau position, and that is when her rifle jammed. It happened between one breath and the next. The bolt cycled, and the round failed to chamber, catching on the feed lips with a specific stuck feeling that every shooter recognizes and dreads. And Emily said nothing, made no sound, but something happened in her chest that was not quite panic and not quite anything with a civilized name. She cleared the jam with the mechanical speed of someone who has done it 10,000 times, dropped the magazine rack, the bolt clear, the chamber reseat, the magazine chamber a round, but the sequence took 8 seconds and 8 seconds in a 12-minute window, with 1 target remaining and a potentially compromised position was 8 years. Brian, Ryan said, I know. 6 minutes, 50 seconds. I know. She brought the rifle back up, found the eastern plateau position through the scope, relocated the hide, and the hide was empty. She stopped breathing. The eastern plateau position, the seventh shooter, the one she had identified through a shimmer of heat displacement 3 hours ago and tracked through a series of micro-movements over the following hours, was empty. The shooter had moved. "Ryan," she said very carefully, "the seventh position is clear." A pause. "I see that," he said. "Where is he?" Another pause. Longer. Ryan was scanning. She could feel him scanning, the quality of attention that comes off a person doing something urgent. And then Ryan said in a voice she had never heard from him before, a voice that had gone very, very quiet, in the way that voices go quiet when they're carrying something too large for a normal tone. There's an eighth." She didn't move. She didn't say anything. 11 o'clock from the eastern plateau, rock formation, you can't see it from your angle. His voice dropped even further. "He's got his scope on me." This was the twist she hadn't seen coming. Not a variation of what she'd planned for, not a harder version of the same problem. A completely different problem, an eighth shooter who hadn't been in any of her calculations positioned where she couldn't see him from her current location with Ryan Walker's head in his crosshairs. 7 enemy snipers she had found. She had hunted them one by one for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And somewhere in the dark between the things she knew, an eighth had been waiting. Emily Carter had 2 choices, and she had approximately 4 seconds to make them. She could swing her rifle to Ryan's position to the rock formation at 11 o'clock from the eastern plateau that she couldn't currently see, and she could try to find a new angle on an eighth shooter she hadn't identified and hadn't ranged and hadn't mapped into her sequence. And while she was doing that, the 7th shooter who had moved from his position and whose new location she did not know would be somewhere in this valley doing something she couldn't anticipate. Or she could tell Ryan to move, to break cover, to get low, get small, create a different problem for the shooter who was looking at him. But breaking cover meant movement. Movement meant noise. Noise meant the 7th shooter, wherever he was, had his question answered. Meant the compound was alerted. Meant 8 SEALs moved before the valley was clear. 4 seconds. She made her decision. "Ryan," she said, "don't move." Do not move. Do you trust me?" A pause that lasted 1 second, which felt like considerably longer. "Yes," he said, "then do not move." She took her rifle off the eastern plateau. She swung left, hard left, past her normal arc of observation, looking for the angle that didn't exist from her current position, the angle that would let her see the rock formation at 11 o'clock from the eastern plateau where an 8th shooter had Ryan's head in a scope. She couldn't find the angle. The terrain between her position and that rock formation was uncooperative. There was too much ridge in the way, which meant she had to move. Moving meant exposing herself. Moving meant that whatever the 7th shooter was doing, wherever he had gone, he now had a moving target to track that was very close to the position he had vacated. Moving meant breaking the stillness she had maintained for 3 days. Emily got up. Not slowly, not carefully. She moved with controlled speed, low and lateral, 3 meters to the left, putting herself in a new geometry relative to the valley. The movement took 4 seconds, the longest 4 seconds of her life. She went back down. Scope up, found the rock formation at 11 o'clock from the eastern plateau, found the 8th shooter, found Ryan's position through the shooter's sightline, made the calculation, new range. 700 meters, new angle, slight downhill slope, wind now at her back, which subtracted from her drift adjustment. Ryan said, and there was something in his voice now that he was working very hard to keep out of it and not entirely succeeding. "He's not moving." "I know." "He's not moving, which means he's waiting. Which means, Ryan, I need quiet." Silence. She breathed in. She felt the weight of what she was about to do. Not the technical weight, the human weight. Ryan Walker, who had been lying beside her for 70 hours, who had called her wins and confirmed her targets and said, "You can do this," without ever saying those words, was 30 meters away with a crosshair on his head, and she was the only thing between that crosshair and what came next. She breathed out. She made the shot. The crack of the rifle was the loudest thing in the world for exactly 1 second, and then the echo absorbed it, and the valley was quiet. "Ryan," she said. 4 seconds of silence. "Yeah," he said finally, and she could hear in that single syllable that it had been very close, that the shooter had been a fraction of a moment from the decision she had beaten him to. "Yeah, I'm okay." "Stay down. Believe me." She was already scanning for the seventh, the one who had moved. 4 minutes and 6 seconds remaining. The compound was still quiet. Harlan's team was still holding. But somewhere in this valley, one shooter had changed position, and she did not know where he was. "Harlan," she said into the radio. "Carter, I have a complication. I'm at 6 confirmed, 2 remaining, 1 is at a new unknown position. I need—" "You have 4 minutes," Harlan said. "Not an accusation, a fact." "I know what I have," as she said. She scanned. She went back to fundamentals, not looking for the shooter, looking for what the shooter had done. A person who moves changes things. They displace air, they disturb ground cover, they create a new center of stillness in whatever position they settle into. She found him. 3 minutes and 40 seconds remaining. He had moved to a position that was, she recognized with a cold kind of professional respect, actually smarter than his original hide. He had anticipated the sequence. He had moved to cover a gap in his own line, the gap created when the East Ridge shooter had gone down, leaving a corridor of approach that was theoretically unmonitored. He had been thinking while she was shooting. She respected that. She also needed him to stop existing. 345 meters, Ryan said, having found him at nearly the same time she had. Shortest shot in the sequence. Wind, still at your back, 7 miles per hour. At 345 meters, 7 miles per hour of tailwind was almost nothing. The shot was the most technically straightforward shot in the sequence. It was also the shot where she was most exposed, most tired, most aware that she had been awake for 32 hours, and that her hands, if she looked at them, would be very slightly trembling from sustained physical effort. She didn't look at her hands. She made the shot. "Target down," Ryan said. 08, 8 targets total, all clear. Silence. Then Ryan said very quietly, "Holy God, Emily." She didn't respond. She keyed the radio. "Harlan," she said, "all ridge positions are clear. 8 confirmed. You have a clean valley. Move your team." A pause. 8, Harlan said. "There was an additional shooter I hadn't accounted for. He's down. Move your team." Another pause. Shorter. "Moving him up," Harlan said. Emily put down the radio. She didn't move. She lay on the mountainside and breathed, really breathed for the first time in 12 minutes. And she looked at the valley below where 8 Navy SEALs were beginning to move toward a compound that would not meet them with 7 expert marksmen waiting in the dark. Ryan crawled the 30 meters between them without a word. When he reached her, he stopped and looked at her for a long moment. "You moved," he said, "you broke cover. You had to move to make that shot." "Yes," she said. "You chose me," he said. "When you found out there were 8, when you had to choose between finishing the sequence and getting me." "The sequence was nearly done," she said. "That's not—" He stopped, compressed something, started again. "You chose me first." She met his eyes. She didn't say anything. "Why?" he said. She thought about Ortiz, about Sophia, about the specific weight of knowing someone and then not knowing them anymore because a bomb on a road had decided the matter without anyone's permission. Because the hardest choice, she said, isn't always the one in the scope. Ryan looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded slowly, once the nod of someone who has just understood something they won't forget. Below them, the SEAL team crossed the valley floor in clean, fast movement, unopposed and made for the compound wall. The assault had begun, and Emily Carter, lying on a mountainside in a country God had supposedly forgotten, allowed herself one breath of something that wasn't quite relief, because relief was for after. And this wasn't after yet, before she brought her rifle back up and began the most important thing she had left to do. She began watching. The SEAL team moved fast. Emily watched them through her scope, 8 figures crossing the valley floor in the particular kind of controlled speed that comes from years of training and the specific motivation of knowing that someone has just done something extraordinary to give you this window, and you are not going to waste it. They moved in pairs, covering each other, reading the compound wall as they approached it, and they were good. She had worked with SEAL teams before, and she knew the difference between people who moved well and people who moved like this, and these 8 men moved like this. Harlan's voice came through the earpiece. "At the wall. Bravo team is on the northeast corner. Alpha is stacking at the main entrance." "Copy," Emily said. "I have overwatch. Call any movement you can't identify." "Understood." Ryan had repositioned 2 meters to her right, giving them slightly different angles of observation, so their combined field of view covered more of the compound interior. His spotting scope was up, his breathing was controlled. He had the look of someone who had filed the last 12 minutes in a place they'd deal with later and was fully present now, which was, she thought, exactly the right thing to do and exactly what she trained him to do. Compound is quiet, Ryan said. No visible movement on the roof. They know we're here, Emily said. Not a question. Maybe, maybe not. If none of the 8 got a signal out, they know, she said. Someone always knows. She had learned that. In 3 years of combat, that was one of the truest things she had accumulated, that the enemy, whatever else you could say about them, was not stupid. And when 8 of their most carefully positioned people stopped answering their radios inside a 12-minute window, the people who were paying attention would notice. The question was not whether they knew. The question was how much time had passed between the first shot and the moment that knowledge became action. She estimated 4 minutes, maybe 5. The SEAL team had been moving for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Harlan, she said, you need to be inside in the next 90 seconds. We're working on it, Carter. I'm not suggesting the compound is going to get complicated in 90 seconds. A pause. Then Harlan's voice directed away from the radio, giving his team a command she couldn't fully hear. And then the sound of the breech explosive sharp controlled, and then 8 voices going loud simultaneously as the SEAL team went through the door fast and hard and committed. Emily kept her scope on the roof, on the windows, on the courtyard. 30 seconds passed. Harlan's voice. Alpha is in the main building. 3 personnel, detained 2 armed. Bravo is clearing the east outbuilding. Copy. Watch the underground. Any compound this well defended has an exit that isn't visible from above. We're looking. Another 30 seconds. Then, main building is clear. We have documents, hard drives, communication equipment. No sign of primary target. Emily's jaw tightened. Ryan looked at her. He didn't say anything. He's not there, Harlan said, and his voice had a quality in it now. Not defeat, but the specific flatness of a man managing a significant disappointment while maintaining operational focus. Qassem is not in the compound. She had known, she realized, in the way you sometimes know things before you can justify knowing them. There had been something about the pattern of the compound's activity over 70 hours that had sat wrong with her. Not wrong enough to change the mission, but present like a low note you feel more than hear. The compound had been active enough to confirm the intelligence, but not active enough to confirm a high-value target's physical presence. She had attributed that feeling to paranoia, to the particular kind of overcaution that comes from too much time alone on a mountain with too much time to think. She had been right to feel it. She had been wrong to attribute it to paranoia. He was there, Emily said. He left. How recent is the evidence inside? Harlan was quiet for a moment. She could hear him moving, heard him ask someone a question she couldn't make out. Then food still warm in the main building. Someone ate here in the last 3 hours. He's close, she said. He didn't leave because he knew we were coming. He left because of something else, something operational. He's still in the area. Carter, I have a compound full of intelligence that needs to be secured and extracted, and I know what you have. I'm telling you, he's close. That may be true, but I can't. And then the first shot came from the northern ridge. Not one of her 8. One of hers were down. All 8 were accounted for. All 8 were cold. This was different. This was incoming fire from a direction she hadn't fully cleared, from a distance she estimated at 1,100 meters, and it hit the courtyard wall 6 inches from where one of Harlan's SEALs was standing. Contact north. The SEAL's voice through the radio was train-controlled and fast. Single shot north ridge, 1,100 plus meters. Emily was already swinging north. Harlan, get your team inside the walls. Now, you have reinforcements incoming from the north. How many? I don't know yet. Get inside. She found the north ridge through her scope and began scanning, not for individuals, not yet, but for movement patterns, the kind of broad visual intake that tells you whether you're looking at 2 people or 20. What she saw made her stomach drop in a very specific way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with arithmetic. Ryan, she said, I see them, he said. It wasn't 2, it wasn't 20. It was somewhere between 30 and 40 fighters moving along the north ridge in a spread formation, using the terrain with the practiced ease of people who had grown up in these mountains and knew every fold and shadow and approach. They were moving fast, they were organized, and they were not reacting to the SEAL assault as if it was a surprise. They were moving with the prearranged confidence of people executing a plan they had already made. This had been anticipated. Qasem had anticipated a raid. The 7 snipers weren't just protection, they were bait. The compound was bait. The entire setup was designed to draw in an assault team, pin them in the valley with the ring of snipers, and then flood the valley with reinforcements from the north while the team was pinned down. The plan had failed because of Emily, because the ring of snipers had been cleared before the assault team was inside the trap. But the reinforcements hadn't gotten that message yet, or hadn't adapted their plan, or had decided to come anyway and adjust on the move. Either way, 30 to 40 fighters were 4 minutes from the valley floor. "Harlan," Emily said, and her voice was completely level in a way she was working for. "You have approximately 4 minutes before the valley fills with reinforcements from the north. I count 30 plus. You need to secure the intelligence and establish a defensive position inside those walls." A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. She could hear Harlan processing, making decisions, the sound of a good commander running math in real time. "Can you slow them?" he said. "Some," she said. "Not all." "How many?" "Enough to buy you the 4 minutes. Maybe 6. "I need 8. I'll give you what I can give you." She was already working. The North Ridge fighters were spread out, which was tactically smart. It prevented a single weapon from being decisive against their formation. But spread out also meant she could pick points of the formation to impact without necessarily stopping the advance, and the right points, the leaders, the communication nodes, the men who were directing the movement could slow the whole by creating confusion in the parts. She found the lead element, fired. "First contact," Ryan said. "Formation is adjusting." She moved to the second leader. She could read at command presence even at this range. Something about the way a person moves when others are orienting to them. The slight difference in posture between the person giving direction and the person receiving it. Fired. "Second contact, they're going to ground." Good. Going to ground was good. Jihan. Going to ground cost time, which was the only currency that mattered right now. She kept working the North Ridge. Not trying to stop them, she didn't have enough ammunition or time to stop 30-plus fighters with a sniper rifle from a single position. She was trying to make them slow, cautious, uncertain. She was trying to make them ask questions instead of moving, because questions cost seconds, and seconds were what Harlan needed. 6 minutes since first contact, Ryan said. Harlan's team is still in the compound. "Harlan," she said. "Working," he said, and she could hear urgency in his voice for the first time. Not panic. Harlan was too experienced for panic, but urgency, the sound of a man who is doing things quickly because quickly is necessary. "We've got encrypted drives, physical documents in Arabic, and what looks like Pashto communications equipment, maps." "Maps of what?" A pause. "Emily," his voice had changed. The urgency had taken on a different quality. "Maps of 3 FOBs, routes, guard schedules, timing sequences." She understood immediately. Coordinated attack. 3 bases simultaneously, Harlan said. "If this intelligence is what it looks like, get it out," she said. "Everything, get it out now." "We're getting it." She kept working the North Ridge. The fighters had gone to ground, but they were starting to move again, low spread wide, using the terrain more aggressively. They were good. She bought another 90 seconds. Then Ryan said, They're flanking. East side coming around the base of the ridge. She can't cover both." She couldn't. Her position covered the north approach cleanly, but the eastern base of the ridge was at an angle that required her to fully reorient, and reorienting meant abandoning the north suppression, and abandoning the north suppression meant the main element moved. "Harlan," she said, "you have secondary contact coming around the east side of the north ridge. How much time do you need?" 2 minutes, maybe 90 seconds. "I can give you 90. She swung east. The flanking element was smaller. She counted 8 individuals moving fast along the eastern base of the ridge. These were the ones who would reach the valley floor first if she didn't redirect them. She fired twice in rapid succession, not precision shots, pressure shots designed to make the element react and reorient rather than move. They worked. The flanking element scattered into cover. But while she was east, the north element moved. "North element is at the ridge base," Ryan said. 2 minutes to valley floor. "Harlan." 90 seconds, Harlan said. "We're almost..." And then Harlan stopped talking mid-sentence, which was wrong, and the channel went quiet, and Emily felt the particular quality of that silence in her chest. "Harlan," she said, static. "Then we have a situation inside. Talk to me." One of the detained personnel had a concealed weapon. Petty Officer Reyes is down, not critical, but a burst of noise-controlled chaos commands being issued. "We've got a secondary firefight inside the compound." Emily processed this in approximately 1 second. The SEAL team was engaged inside, pinned by a situation inside the walls with 30-plus fighters, 2 minutes from the valley floor. An eastern flanking element recovering from her suppression. Ryan to her left, with blood on his sleeve that she hadn't fully registered until this moment. "Ryan," she said sharply, "your arm." He looked down. There was blood on the sleeve of his left arm, not a lot, but real. "I didn't want to mention it during the shot that came close, when the West Ridge shooter fired. A fragment, I think. I'm okay." "How okay?" "Functional," he said, and she could hear that he was telling the truth, not minimizing, actually functional. His hands were steady. His eye was at the scope. "Don't worry about my arm. Worry about the 200 people who are going to die if that intelligence doesn't get out." 200 people. She didn't know if Harlan's estimate was right. She didn't know the full scope of what was in those documents. But she had spent enough time in this war to know that coordinated attacks on 3 forward operating bases weren't theoretical. They were the kind of thing that happened that cost lives in numbers that didn't fit neatly in your head, that left families destroyed in 3s and 5s and dozens. She went back to the north element. They were moving again. 1:30 to the valley floor. "Harlan," she said. "Coming out," he said. "We're coming out now." The SEAL team emerged from the compound in a fighting withdrawal. 2 men covering the rear, Harlan in the center, coordinating 2 men carrying Reyes, who was ambulatory, but clearly compromised, every member of the team carrying evidence bags or hard drives or document packets. They moved to the southern wall of the compound and established a defensive position, and Emily could see from her overwatch exactly what they were working with. 8 men in a compound taking fire from inside and with 30 fighters 90 seconds away. She keyed the radio on the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Ghost 01 requesting immediate fire support and extraction grid." She read the coordinates from memory. "We have 8 personnel, 1 casualty, hostile element, 30-plus approaching from the north." The response came back in 20 seconds, which was fast, which meant someone on the other end had been tracking this mission and was already positioned to respond. "Ghost 01, this is Hammer 6. We have your grid. Apache is en route. 6 minutes out." 6 minutes. She looked at the north element. 90 seconds to the valley floor. "Harlan," she said, "Apache is 6 minutes out. You need to hold that compound for 6 minutes. "Understood," Harlan said, and she could hear in the word that he knew what 6 minutes meant in the current situation, and he was going to do it anyway, which was why SEAL teams were what they were. She started buying time. She was not precise now, she was deliberate, but she was working fast, trading accuracy for rate suppressing, rather than eliminating, making the North Element's approach cost more time than it wanted to spend. Ryan was calling her adjustments between his own work. He had picked up a secondary weapon from the pack and was engaging the Eastern Element as it tried to recover in advance. 4 minutes, 3 minutes. The valley was filling with the sound of a serious firefight, and Emily Carter, who had spent 70 hours being invisible and patient, was now very much visible and very much committed. 2 minutes. Then Ryan grabbed her arm, not gently. Southeast, underground exit. She swung southeast. The motorcycle was already moving. It had come up from a concealed underground exit at the southeastern corner of the compound, a tunnel exit she had suspected existed but hadn't been able to confirm from her position. The rider was moving fast, already 50 meters from the exit, threading between rock formations toward the mountain path that led south. The rider was wearing the specific kind of clothing she recognized from the intelligence briefing photographs. Medium build. The particular way of sitting on a motorcycle that she had committed to memory from a surveillance photograph taken 8 months ago in a different province. It was Farid Qassem. He had been in the compound. He had been there the entire time, and when the assault came, when the firefight had started inside, he had gone underground and come out the other side while everybody was looking somewhere else. "Ryan," she said, "I see him." "Range." Ryan worked his rangefinder. A pause. Then 950 meters, moving, accelerating. He's heading for the mountain path. Once he's on the path, he's behind the ridge. you lose the angle completely. She had approximately 20 seconds. She tracked him. The motorcycle was moving at what she estimated as 45 kilometers per hour across uneven ground, which meant the trajectory was not smooth. It was bobbing and weaving with the terrain in a way that made lead calculation a living thing. Not a calculation, but a conversation between her eye and her trigger finger, and something she couldn't name that lived between them. Ryan said, "You can't make that shot." He said it simply, not cruelly, with the honesty of a man who had watched her make extraordinary shots for 12 minutes and who understood precisely what he was looking at and what it was asking. She didn't answer him. She breathed in. She tracked the motorcycle through the scope, the specific instability of it, the rhythm of the terrain beneath the wheels, the way the rider leaned into the movement, the distance closing to the mountain path where the angle died and Qasim became invisible and free and alive. 900 meters. Moving. Low light. Wind at 7 from the northwest. This was not a shot from a textbook. This was not a shot they taught at Scout Sniper School or discussed in any training environment, because it was the kind of shot that lives in the territory past where training ends and something else begins, something that is either genius or luck or the specific convergence of years of experience with a single moment of absolute clarity. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. Ryan was watching through the spotting scope, watching the motorcycle, watching Qasim, watching the distance between the round's travel time and the target's movement, and he was counting the specific count that happens between a shot and its consequence when the distance is long enough that there is time to notice your counting. 1 second, 1.2 seconds, 1.4. The motorcycle went sideways. Not a controlled stop, not a brake. The front wheel collapsed and the machine flipped and went down hard and fast and tumbling, and the rider went with it, and when the momentum exhausted itself and the dust cleared and the stillness came back, the motorcycle was on its side and Farid Qasim was not moving. Ryan said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then very quietly, in the voice of a man who has just witnessed something, he will spend the rest of his life trying to find the right words for holy God. Emily worked the bolt. She didn't say anything. She looked at the motorcycle. She looked at the man who had built the bomb that killed Marcus Webb and Danielle Ortiz and James Sutton. She looked at the stillness that had come to him at the end of 950 moving meters, the stillness that was different from all the other kinds of stillness she had cataloged in 3 years of this work. She breathed. "Hammer 6 Ghost 01, she said into the radio, her voice completely steady. "Primary target is neutralized. I say again, primary target is down southeast of the compound grid." She gave the coordinates. "Confirm Apache is still on approach. Ghost 01 Apache is 3 minutes out. Hold your position." 3 minutes. She turned back to the valley. The firefight around the compound was still active, the north element pressing against Harlan's defensive position, the east element recovering and advancing. 3 minutes was a long time in a firefight. 3 minutes was an eternity when you were counting the seconds between what you had and what you needed. "Ryan," she said. "Right here," he said. "How's the arm?" "Still functional." "Then let's make these 3 minutes count," she said. And she brought the rifle up and went back to work because the mission wasn't over yet, and Emily Carter did not stop working until the mission was over. The sound of the Apache came in 2 stages. First, the thrum felt in the chest before it was heard with the ears, and then the full mechanical roar of something large and purposeful coming over the ridge fast. And Emily allowed herself exactly 1 second to feel something about that sound, something that was relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with the specific gratitude of a person who has been operating past their limit and has just been told the limit is no longer required. 1 second. Then the Apache opened up on the north element, and the valley changed its answer, and what had been a firefight became something else entirely. The Apache didn't just change the battle, it ended it. Not cleanly. Nothing in combat ends cleanly, but decisively in the way that a superior weapon deployed at the right moment against a force that has committed itself to a position changes the fundamental math of the situation so completely that the other side has to choose between dying where they stand and dying while they run. The north element chose to run. Some of them made it, most of them didn't. The eastern flanking group, already disrupted by Emily's suppression fire, heard the Apache and made the same calculation faster and with better results, melting back into the mountain terrain with the practiced ease of people who had been doing exactly that for decades before any American soldier ever set foot in this country. The valley went quiet in stages. First the heavy fire, then the secondary exchanges, then the sporadic single shots that meant individuals still making decisions, then nothing. Emily lay on the mountainside and listened to the nothing and breathed. Her body, which had been operating on a chemical cocktail of adrenaline and trained suppression for the last hour and 15 minutes, chose this moment to begin its accounting. Her hands were trembling, not violently, but with the fine, persistent tremor of muscle groups that had been locked in sustained tension past their comfortable limit. Her eyes burned. The arm she had been using to brace the rifle had gone partially numb from the elbow down, which she registered as a fact without particular concern because numb was functional, and functional was what she needed for approximately the next 40 minutes. Ghost 01, this is Hammer 6, the radio crackled. Valley is clear. Apache is holding station. What is your extraction situation? She keyed the radio. 2 personnel, 1 with a minor arm wound. We need exfil from our current position. I'm sending you the grid now. Copy 01. We can put a bird in your location in approximately 22 minutes. Can you hold? We can hold, she said. She put the radio down and looked at Ryan. He was sitting up, not lying flat anymore, sitting with his back against the rock formation that had been their home for 73 hours, his left arm across his knee, the sleeve cut back to expose a wound that was, as he had reported, not critical, but was more real than he had let on. A fragment of something rock or metal, she couldn't tell, which had opened a 4-inch gash along the outer forearm that had bled freely and was still seeping. Give me the kit, she said. I can do it myself. Ryan, he handed her the trauma kit without further argument. She worked quickly, clean irrigate pack wrap, doing what needed to be done with the efficiency of someone who had done it before under worse conditions. He hissed once when she irrigated the wound and then controlled it, which she appreciated because she didn't have bandwidth for anything that wasn't task completion right now. How bad, he said, looking at the wound while she worked. You'll need stitches. You won't lose the arm. That's a very specific range of good news. It's the range I've got. She finished the wrap and tied it off. He flexed his hand, testing the grip, and nodded once. Harlan's team, he said. She keyed the radio. Harlan, status. Harlan's voice came back immediately, which was reassuring. Immediately meant conscious and operational, which was the most important thing. All 8 accounted for. Reyes took a round through the left shoulder, clean through. He'll need surgery, but he's stable. We have the intelligence package. I count 4 hard drives, 2 encrypted tablets, a physical document set that looks like it weighs about 8 pounds, and what appears to be a hand-drawn map of all 3 target FOBs with annotated approach routes. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Not relief, not yet, but acknowledgement. Get it on the extraction bird. All of it physically on the bird. Don't transmit any of it until it's in someone's hands at the FOB. Already planned, Harlan said. Carter. A pause. Good work today. She didn't respond to that. She never knew what to do with those moments, not from false modesty, but because good work felt like a category that didn't fit what had happened in the last few hours, the way good weather doesn't quite cover a storm that moves through and breaks things and clears the air all at once. Get your team to the extraction point, she said. She put the radio down and looked at the valley. Ryan was watching her. He had the look he sometimes got, the one she had learned to recognize over the months they'd worked together, where he was processing something and hadn't decided yet whether to say it. She usually waited him out. You know they're going to ask about the sequence, he said. I know. About the deviation, about moving to get the 8th shot, about choosing to break the suppression sequence to cover me instead of finishing the primary targets first. I know, Ryan. Technically, protocol says you finish the sequence before any... I know what protocol says, she said. She wasn't sharp about it. She was just clear. He was quiet for a moment. Are you worried about it? She thought about that honestly. No, she said. I made the choice I made. I'd make it again. Even if they reprimand you. Even then. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded the same slow single nod he had given her on the mountainside after she'd chosen him over the sequence, the nod of someone filing something away permanently. Okay, he said. Then I'll tell them the same thing. You'll tell them what actually happened, she said, which is what I'll tell them too. The extraction helicopter arrived 19 minutes later, 3 minutes ahead of the estimate, which meant the pilots had pushed it, which meant someone in the chain of command had communicated urgency effectively. It landed on the flat shelf of ground 200 meters below their position, and a crew member climbed out and waved up at them. Emily packed her rifle. She did it the same way she had done it 100 times before, methodically without ceremony, each component in its place, the same sequence in reverse from the sequence she had used to set up 73 hours ago on this mountainside. Ryan packed his spotting scope and his kit with his good arm. Awkward but efficient. They climbed down. When they reached the helicopter and climbed in, the crew chief looked at them with the particular expression that people get when they've been told something happened, and they're trying to reconcile what they've been told with the two people sitting in front of them, a staff sergeant and a corporal, both of them dirty and exhausted and smelling like 73 hours on a mountainside, both of them looking like the specific kind of tired that takes more than sleep to fix. "You're Ghost 01, the crew chief said, looking at Emily. "Yes," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "8 snipers." "8," she said. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in the particular kind of respect that moves through people who understand exactly what a thing costs. He handed her a water bottle and didn't say anything else, which was exactly the right call. The helicopter lifted. Emily looked out the window as the valley fell away below them, the compound, the ridge lines, the approaches she had memorized, and in the positions she had found, and the mathematics of the last 12 minutes that would live in her head for the rest of her life, precise and permanent. She watched until the valley was just a feature of the mountain terrain, indistinguishable from everything around it, and then she turned away. Ryan was already asleep. His head had gone back against the helicopter wall, and his breathing had slowed to the deep, absent rhythm of someone whose body had simply closed the account without asking permission. The bandaged arm lay across his knee. She did not sleep. She sat with the water bottle and the engine noise and the specific quality of the return. The way coming back always felt different from going out, heavier. Somehow, even when it was supposed to feel lighter. Loaded with everything that had happened and everything you were carrying back that you hadn't brought with you. She thought about Ortiz, she thought about Sophia, she thought about a 7-year-old girl in New Mexico who liked horses and had recently lost her first tooth and who was going to grow up without her father, and for whom this mission, the compound and the ridge lines and the 12 minutes and the shot at 950 meters would be invisible. A thing that happened in a place she could barely imagine, conducted by people she would never know, mattering in ways that would never be explained to her in terms she could access. There was something about that she needed to sit with, the invisibility of it, the way the most consequential things happened, in places no one watched, decided by people who would never be famous for the decisions they made, mattering in the lives of people who would never know to be grateful. She sat with it for the length of the flight. They landed at the forward operating base 41 minutes later, and before the rotors had fully slowed, there were people waiting for them, the base commander, the intelligence officer who would take custody of the hard drives and documents, a medical team for Ryan and for Reyes, who arrived on a second bird 5 minutes behind them. There was the controlled urgency of people who had been monitoring a situation from a distance and were now close enough to act on what they knew. The intelligence officer, a major named Hutchins, who Emily had dealt with twice before and found to be precise and efficient, met her at the edge of the landing pad. "The intelligence package," he said. "On the second bird," she said. "Harlan has it. All of it. We've been tracking the radio traffic, the maps, if they're what they sound like." "They're what they sound like," she said. "Coordinated attack on 3 FOBs. Approach routes, guard schedules, timing. You need to move on all 3 locations tonight." Hutchins nodded. He was already moving. "We're already calling it in. Carter." He stopped, turned back. "The primary target. Confirmed?" "Confirmed," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "Good," he said, and the word was simple, but the weight in it was not, and she understood he meant more than confirmation, meant the specific relief of knowing that the man responsible for Webb and Ortiz and Sutton was no longer building bombs on roads in this province. "Good," he said again, and then he was moving toward the second bird as it settled onto the pad. Emily walked to the medical tent. She let them check her over dehydration, which she already knew muscle strain in both arms, which she also already knew the beginning of a tension headache that had been building for 6 hours but which she had been declining to acknowledge until now. The medic handed her an IV bag and told her to sit down, and she sat down. Ryan was in the next bay awake now. The helicopter landing had woken him, and receiving actual stitches in his arm, with the look of someone who has decided the only dignified response to stitches without adequate anesthesia is to stare at the opposite wall and think about something else. Stop looking at it, the medic said. I'm not looking at it, Ryan said. You keep glancing. I'm assessing. Stop assessing. Emily watched this exchange and felt something move through her that was close to warmth, which surprised her slightly because warmth was not an emotion she associated with the particular hours following a mission. But it was there something that had to do with Ryan being alive and annoying a medic, which was precisely the kind of information that made the last 73 hours cohere into something she could carry. The base commander found her 20 minutes later. Colonel Dennis Marsh, a man in his late 50s, who had the particular weathered quality of someone who had served long enough to have lost his shock at most things but not his investment in them. He sat down across from her without preamble. Walk me through it, he said. She walked him through it. She was thorough and she was accurate, and she did not editorialize or minimize or amplify. 7 snipers identified over 70 hours of observation. The tactical situation communicated to Harlan. The 12-minute proposal. The sequence and its execution. The jam. The 8th shooter. The deviation from protocol to cover Ryan. The recovery. The firefight. The shot. The Apache. The extraction. Marsh listened the way Harlan had listened, completely without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. 8 targets, he said. 8, she said. And the deviation, breaking the sequence to engage the 8th before the primary sequence was complete. Yes, she said. Protocol says finish the sequence. I know what protocol says. Walker would have died. Almost certainly yes, she said. And you made that call. I did. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes and did not look away, which was not defiance. She had nothing to be defiant about. She had made a decision she believed in, and she was prepared to stand in front of whatever came from it. It was simply honesty, which she had found was the cleanest way to exist in these moments. The intelligence your team recovered, Marsh said finally, is being actioned tonight. We have confirmation from 3 separate FOBs that they were already seeing pre-attack indicators. Without this intelligence, we were not going to catch it in time. He paused. The analysts are saying preliminary count of lives at risk was over 200. She didn't react to that number. She had known a version of it since Harlan said the words 3 FOBs. Knowing it and hearing it confirmed were not the same experience, but she had prepared for the confirmation. The mission outcome is not in question, Marsh said. What is in question is the protocol deviation. I understand, she said. It will go in the report. I know. There will likely be a formal review. I understand, Tom. Marsh looked at her. Something moved across his expression, something he wasn't putting into words, some version of a thing he felt about this situation that was in conflict with another version of a thing he felt about this situation. Carter, he said, off the record. She waited. There are people in this building right now who are alive because of what you did today, he said. Not just the 8 SEALs, the men and women at 3 FOBs who were going to be hit in a coordinated attack next week. All of those people. He paused. That matters. I want you to know that it matters regardless of what the formal review says. She nodded once. On the record, he said, shifting back, I have a protocol deviation to address, and I will address it. Yes, sir, she said. He stood. He looked at her one more time with the expression she still couldn't fully read. Respect and something more complicated than respect, something that had to do with age and experience, and maybe the specific sorrow of a man who has sent enough people to places like that valley to understand what it actually costs as opposed to what it costs on paper. He left without saying anything else. Emily sat with the IV bag and the headache she was finally allowing, and the accounting that was beginning, the quiet private accounting that follows every mission where you go back through it and you ask whether you made the right calls, not the tactical calls, but the human calls, the ones that live in the space between what you were ordered to do and what you decided to do with your own hands. She had broken protocol. She had deviated from sequence. She had chosen Ryan. She ran it again. She ran it 3 times the way she ran every hard decision, not to second guess it, but to understand it clearly enough to live with it. Not to find a version where she had done nothing wrong, but to find the version that was true. The true version was she had made a choice that cost the mission 4 seconds and saved Ryan Walker's life, and the mission had succeeded anyway, and she would make the same choice again, and she knew that knowing that was going to matter more than any medal or reprimand in the years ahead. She thought about Webb, about Ortiz, about Sutton. She thought about the three of them and the bomb on the road and the smile Fareed Qasem had worn when he turned away from the burning vehicle, and she thought about the motorcycle going sideways in the dust at 950 meters. And she allowed herself to feel what she felt about that, which was not triumph and not satisfaction and not the clean, bright thing that victory is supposed to be. It was something quieter than all of those, something that didn't have a name she liked. The specific gravity of having done what needed to be done in the place it needed to be done at the cost it needed to cost and having no apology to make for any of it. Ryan appeared in the doorway of the bay, his arm freshly wrapped in white bandaging, moving with the careful economy of someone whose body has been through something significant and is now negotiating terms. "They gave me painkillers," he said. "Good. They're not working yet. They will." He came and sat down across from her, and he looked at her with the look she had come to know, the one that meant he was deciding something about what to say. "The shot," he said, "at the motorcycle." She waited. 950 meters, moving target, low light, 7 miles per hour crosswind. After everything else you'd already done. He paused. "I told you that you couldn't make it." "You did," she said. "I was wrong." "You were being honest about the odds," she said. "That's not the same as being wrong." He thought about that. "I keep running it back. The timing, the trajectory correction you had to make in real time. The way the terrain was affecting the motorcycle's movement pattern." He shook his head slowly. "How did you know you could make it?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. Not the technical answer she could give him, the technical answer in her sleep. The other answer, the one underneath the ballistics and the training and the accumulated thousands of hours of building the skill that lived in her hands. "I didn't know," she said. "I knew what would happen if I didn't try." He absorbed that. "That's the difference, isn't it?" he said slowly. Not quite a question. "Between what?" she said. "Between knowing you can do something and doing it anyway." He looked at his bandaged arm. "Between waiting for certainty and accepting that certainty is a luxury the situation isn't offering." She looked at him, 23 years old, sitting in a medical bay with a stitched arm and painkillers that weren't working yet, working through something in real time that most people spent years not getting to. "You'll be a good sniper," she said, "when you're running your own team." He looked up. "I'm not running my own team." "You will be," she said. 2 years, maybe less." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to be like you," he said, "when I'm running my own team, the way you think, the way you decide." She felt something shift in her chest, not quite discomfort, something closer to the weight of being seen in a way you hadn't expected to be seen. "Don't be like me," she said, "be better." He started to say something, then he stopped. Then he nodded the third nod of the day, each one carrying something different. This one carrying something she thought might be a decision he'd already made about who he wanted to become. Outside the medical tent, the base was moving fast with the particular urgency of an operation being actioned. Vehicles, radio traffic, the sound of people coordinating things that would unfold tonight at 3 forward operating bases where men and women were currently going about their evening routines without knowing how close a calculated violence had been to reaching them and how far away it had been pushed by a sequence of events that had started with a sniper lying on a mountainside 73 hours ago. Emily put down the IV bag. The headache was still there. The tremor in her hands was still there, finer now, but present. The exhaustion was enormous and patient, waiting for her to stop needing to function so it could collect what she owed. She would sleep. She would write her report accurate, thorough, complete, including the deviation and its reason, and her clear-eyed assessment of why she had made it and would make it again. She would face whatever review came from it with the same straightforwardness she brought to everything. But before she did any of that, she sat for 1 more minute in the medical tent, with the sounds of the base around her and the weight of the day in her hands, and she allowed herself to be exactly where she was, not already in the next thing, not rehearsing the report or the review or the conversations to come. Just here, just this. 73 hours on a mountain, 8 targets, 1 shot at 950 meters, 1 deviation from protocol, 200 lives that would continue being lives tonight because of what she and Ryan and 8 Navy SEALs had done in a valley that didn't appear on any commercial map. That was the accounting. That was the whole of it. She sat with it. And then she stood up because there was more to do, and Emily Carter did not stop until the work was done. The report took 4 hours to write, not because it was complicated. Emily had always been precise with written language, the same way she was precise with everything else, and the facts of what had happened in that valley were clear to her in a way that required no reconstruction. She had lived them in real time with the full attention of someone who understood that details matter because details are what the truth is made of. Every range, every wind call, every timing mark, every decision and its reason. She put it all down in the flat, accurate language of an official military document, and she did not soften any of it, especially not the deviation. She wrote the deviation with the same precision she brought to everything else, timestamp, tactical situation. The reason she broke sequence, the calculation she had made in the moment, the outcome. She did not frame it as heroism, and she did not frame it as error. She framed it as a decision made by her under the conditions that existed with the information she had, and with full awareness of both its cost and its necessity. She signed the report at 2:17 in the morning. Ryan was asleep in the next bunk. When she finally laid down his bandaged arm across his chest, his breathing the deep and absent rhythm of someone who has spent everything they have and been given permission to stop. She listened to it for approximately 45 seconds before she was asleep herself, which was about 40 seconds longer than she expected. She didn't dream, or if she did, she didn't remember it. In some mornings, that is its own kind of grace. The formal review convened 6 days later at Bagram in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and institutional coffee before a 3-member panel that included a colonel from the Judge Advocate General's office, a senior intelligence officer, and a Marine general named Hargrove, who Emily had never met but whose reputation she knew, a man who had served 31 years and who was said to be the kind of person who asked questions because he wanted answers rather than confirmation. Harlan testified first. She wasn't in the room for his testimony, but she was told afterward briefly and without elaboration that he had been thorough and that he had been clear about what her actions had meant for his team. Then it was her turn. She walked in, sat down, and answered every question they asked her. She answered them completely, and she answered them once without elaboration, designed to protect herself, and without omission, designed to minimize the deviation. The colonel from JAG asked her 3 times in 3 different framings whether she understood that protocol required her to complete the primary sequence before engaging a secondary threat. 3 times she said yes, she understood that, and 3 times she explained why she had deviated and would deviate again under the same conditions. General Hargrove had been quiet through most of the questioning. He asked one question. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said, "at the moment you made the decision to break sequence and engage the 8th shooter, what was going through your mind?" She thought about how to answer that honestly, which took her approximately 3 seconds, which in a formal review room feels considerably longer. "Walker," she said. "Ryan Walker was going through my mind." Hargrove held her gaze. "Not the mission. The mission was going to succeed," she said. 6 of the 8 targets were down. The SEAL team was already past the point of most critical exposure. The mission risk profile had shifted. Walker's risk profile had not. She paused. "I made the call that the mission could absorb 4 seconds and Walker could not absorb a round to the head." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "And if you had been wrong," he said, "if breaking sequence had compromised the mission, then I would be sitting here telling you I was wrong," she said, "and I would mean it." Another silence. "But you weren't wrong," Hargrove said. "No," she said, "I wasn't." He nodded once, slowly. Then he looked down at the papers in front of him and made a note, and she couldn't read what the note said, and she had decided before she walked into this room that she was not going to spend energy trying. The review concluded that afternoon. The formal finding was delivered to her in writing 48 hours later, which was fast, unusually fast, which told her that whatever had been decided had not required extensive deliberation. The finding was 2 things simultaneously, which was she had come to understand exactly how these things tended to work when the facts were complicated enough to resist simple categorization. The first thing was a letter of reprimand, formal and permanent, attached to her service record, documenting the protocol deviation and the panel's determination that regardless of outcome, The deviation represented a breach of established procedure that could not be officially sanctioned. The second thing was a recommendation for the Silver Star. She held both documents and read them twice each and then set them on the desk in the small office she had been given for the duration of her time at Bagram, and sat for a few minutes with the specific feeling of having been simultaneously corrected and honored by the same institution for the same action, and understanding that both responses were in their own ways honest. Ryan found her there. He knocked on the open door frame, which he never usually did. He usually just talked, and she understood that meant he knew what the document said, and he was treating the moment with appropriate weight. Both, he said. Both, she said. He came in and sat down. He looked at the documents on the desk without touching them. Reprimand and Silver Star, he said. Same action. Yes. Is that how do you feel about that? She thought about it honestly. Right, she said. It feels right. The reprimand is accurate. The mission matters more than one spotter. Protocol exists because it works, and it works because people follow it. They were not wrong to note the deviation. She paused, and the outcome was what it was. Ryan was quiet for a moment. You're not angry. No, Michelle. Most people would be angry. I know. You broke a rule to save my life, and they're punishing you for it. They're noting it, she said, and there's a difference. He looked at her with the expression he had been developing over the months of working together. The one that was trying to figure out how she had arrived at the place she existed in, which was not the place of someone who had made peace with things by deciding not to feel them, but the place of someone who felt things clearly and then made decisions about what to do with them. I talked to the families, he said. She looked up. Webb's family, Ortiz's, and Sutton's, he said. Before the review, Command gave me permission to call. He paused. I told them what we found, what it meant. The attack that was prevented. He stopped. His voice had changed, not broken, but carrying something. Ortiz's wife, Sophia's mother. She said, oh, he stopped again. Ryan. She said thank you. She said it in a way that he compressed something. She knows it doesn't bring him back. She said that. She said she knows. But she said knowing that he was part of something that saved 200 people, she said it matters. It changes something about how she can talk about him to Sophia. Emily felt something in her chest that she was not going to name in this room. She felt it, and she acknowledged it, and she allowed it to exist without performing it. Good, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Yeah, Ryan said. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Quick one motion, not making a thing of it. Yeah, good. They sat in the office together for a while, not saying anything, which was the right thing to do, with a silence that had that much in it. The Silver Star ceremony was 3 weeks later, back in the States at a base in North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning that was overcast and smelled like incoming rain. There were reporters, not many. It wasn't a big press event. It wasn't the kind of ceremony that got televised, but enough that Emily was aware of cameras in her peripheral vision in the particular performance of public significance that military ceremonies required, which she found uncomfortable in the specific way that private people find public attention. Uncomfortable not with hostility, but with a persistent sensation of being seen at an angle that doesn't quite match how you actually look. General Hargrove was there. He pinned the medal himself, which she hadn't expected, and when he stepped back after pinning it, he held out his hand and she shook it, and he said something to her, very quietly, close enough that the cameras wouldn't catch the words. He said, the reprimand stays. That's the institution doing what it has to do. What you did in that valley, that's also going to stay. Both of those things are true at the same time. Don't let anyone tell you they can't be. She held his gaze. I know, she said. He nodded. He stepped back. The ceremony continued. Ryan was in the front row, his arm out of the sling now, but still moving carefully, his dress uniform, precise, watching her with the expression of someone who is trying to make a memory, deliberately, consciously, the way you look at something you know you're going to want to be able to see again later. The reporters who found her afterward asked questions she answered briefly and accurately. They wanted the drama of it, the 7 snipers, the 12 minutes, the impossible shot, the medal. They wanted the version that fit into a headline, which was a version she understood but could not inhabit because it left out everything that actually mattered about what happened. One reporter, a woman in her 40s who seemed sharper than the rest, asked her a different kind of question. She asked, when you made the decision to deviate from protocol to save your spotter, Did you know it was going to work out? Emily looked at her. No, she said. Then why did you do it? Because not trying wasn't something I was willing to do, she said. The reporter looked at her for a moment. That's going to be the quote, she said. I know, Emily said and moved on. The headlines that ran the following day were predictably about the shot at 950 meters and the 7 they got it wrong. It was 8 snipers and the 12 minutes. The quote about not trying made it into 2 of the 3 major pieces. She read them once and put them away. What she kept and read more than once was a letter. It came from Ryan, which surprised her because he was not a person who wrote letters. He was a person who said things directly or didn't say them. But he had written this one on actual paper in handwriting that was careful and slightly formal, in the way that handwriting gets when someone is trying to say something important and doesn't want to get it wrong. He wrote about the valley, about 73 hours on a mountainside, about the specific experience of lying still for that long and learning patience from someone who already had it. He wrote about the 12 minutes and what it had been like to spot for her through them, the particular experience of watching someone operate past what you believe was possible and revising your entire sense of what possible meant. He wrote about the moment the 8th shooter had him in scope, about the 4 seconds that passed before her shot, about what it felt like to lie still in those 4 seconds and trust someone completely without reservation, without the insurance of certainty, with nothing but the knowledge of who she was and what she had done and the decision that this was enough. He wrote, I've thought about what you said about the hardest target not being the one in the scope. I think I understand it now in a way I didn't when you said it. The target in the scope is something you can train for. The other kind, the decision that costs you something that you make, not because you're certain it's right, but because not making it is something you can't live with. That's the one that actually defines what you are. You made that decision for me. I'm going to spend the rest of my career trying to be the kind of person who deserves it. She read that paragraph 4 times. She put the letter in the same box where she kept the things that mattered, the things that didn't have a category in any filing system. The military provided the things that were the real record of a life in this work, more accurate than any official document and more durable than any medal. 18 months later, she was standing at the front of a classroom at Scout Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia, in front of 23 students who were at the beginning of the long process of becoming something she had spent years becoming, and who were looking at her with the particular attentiveness of people who have been told that the person in front of them has done something extraordinary and are trying to figure out what that looks like from the outside. She had been an instructor for 7 months. She had discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was good at it, not the tactical instruction which she had expected to be good at, but the other kind. The kind where you help someone understand not just what to do, but why it matters and what it costs and who you become in the process of doing it. The students were good. Some of them were very good. All of them were working hard in the particular way you work hard when you're trying to become something you don't yet fully understand. On this particular morning, a student in the 3rd row, a Lance Corporal named Thomas Reeves, 21 years old from Alabama, who was probably going to be exceptional if he learned to manage his impatience, raised his hand during the debrief of a training exercise and asked the question that students always asked in one form or another eventually. Sergeant Carter, he said, the mission in Afghanistan, the Valley. Can I ask you something about it? The room went attentive in a different way than it had been attentive before. She recognized the quality of that attention, the way a group of people go still when they know something real is about to be said. You can ask, she said. The 8th shooter, Reeves said, the one you didn't account for, the one that had Walker in his scope. Protocol says finish the sequence. You broke protocol. He paused, choosing his next words with the deliberateness of someone who understands he is in territory that has implications. Was that the right call? Knowing what you know now, would you do it the same way? She looked at him. She looked at the 23 faces in the room. All of them still, all of them waiting. Yes, she said. Reeves nodded slowly. Even with a reprimand. The reprimand is correct, she said. Protocol exists for real reasons, and breaking it has real costs, and those costs need to be noted. That's not wrong. That's how institutions maintain standards, and standards matter because they save lives. She paused, and I would break it again. How do you hold both of those things, Reeves said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. The question of a young person trying to build a framework for something that doesn't fit simple frameworks. She thought about General Hargrove. About both of those things are true at the same time. About Ryan's letter in the 4 seconds on the mountainside. About Ortiz's wife saying thank you in a way that changed something about how she could talk about him to Sophia. The same way you hold most true things, she said, not by making one of them go away, by understanding that reality is large enough to contain both, and your job is to be large enough to carry both without dropping either. The room was completely quiet. Reeves wrote something down. Several other students wrote something down. She noticed this without reacting to it. "What's the hardest part of this work?" another student asked a woman in the back row, Corporal Diaz, who was quiet in the sessions and consistently the most precise in the field. Emily looked at her. "The decision," she said, "on the shot, the decision you make before the shot and after the shot, and in the years between the shots, when you're living with what you decided and what it picked and whether it was worth it." "How do you know if it was worth it?" Diaz asked. "You don't always," Emily said. "Sometimes you know immediately. Sometimes you're waiting for information that takes years to arrive. Sometimes it arrives and it's not what you wanted. Sometimes it's exactly what you needed to hear and you didn't know you needed it." She paused. "The work isn't finding certainty. The work is continuing to decide without it." Diaz looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, not the young learning nod of someone receiving instruction, but something older than that, something that recognized what it was being told because it already somewhere knew it. Emily looked at the 23 faces. She thought about the valley, about the 12 minutes, about 73 hours of patient watching, and the 8 targets, and the shot at 950 meters, and Ryan's 4 seconds, and Harlan's team crossing a valley floor that should have been a killing ground and wasn't because she had made it, not that. She thought about Webb and Ortiz and Sutton. She thought about Sophia, who was now 9 years old and had probably lost another tooth by now, and maybe had learned to be a little better at math. She thought about the 200 people at 3 forward operating bases who had gone home to their families because an intelligence package had come out of a mud brick compound on a Tuesday and someone had known what to do with it. She thought about Ryan, who was leading his own team now in a province she tried not to think too much about, and who called her every few weeks and who had told her on the last call that he had a new spotter who reminded him of himself 18 months ago, and he didn't know yet whether that was a good thing. She thought about the letter in the box. She thought about what it costs to be the person who makes the decision that has to be made when everyone else is still deciding whether it's possible. She looked at 23 students who were at the beginning of finding out what they were made of, and she said the thing she always said because it was the truest thing she had accumulated in 3 years of this work and 7 months of teaching it, and a lifetime of learning what it means to be responsible for something that matters. "The hardest target," she said, "isn't the one in your scope." The room held its breath. "The hardest target," she said, "is the decision you make when someone else's life depends on yours." Sure. When you don't have certainty, when protocol says one thing and the human being next to you is about to lose everything. When the right answer isn't in any manual and the wrong answer is survivable but not something you can carry. She paused. That target doesn't disappear when the mission ends. You carry it. You carry it for years. And the question isn't whether you'll face it, you will. All of you will. The question is what you'll be made of when you do. No one moved. No one spoke. She let the silence sit because the silence was doing necessary work. Then she said, "Skill wins battles. Everyone in this room is going to develop skill. That's what this training is for, and you're going to be excellent at it. But character who you are when the scope is steady and the decision is impossible, and the person next to you is counting on what you decide, that is what determines who you become after the battle is over." She looked at Reeves. She looked at Diaz. She looked at 21 other faces that were young and attentive and carrying the beginning of something they hadn't yet been asked to pay the full cost of. "That's what I'm here to help you build," she said. "The rest of it, the technique, the patience, the ballistics, that's craft. This is character, and you cannot separate them, not in this work, not in any work that matters." She stepped back from the front of the classroom. "Dismissed," she said, "range exercise in 20 minutes. Don't be late." The students moved. The room filled with the sound of people gathering things, chairs on floors, the particular energy of 23 young people who have just received something they're still in the process of understanding. Reeves stopped at the door. He turned back. "Sergeant Carter," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. She thought about all the things she could say about how he'd understand it more in a year. In 5 years, about how the real test was still ahead of him, about how the valley and the 12 minutes and the shot at 950 meters had not made her the person she was, but had revealed the person she had already been becoming. She said, "Go be great." He nodded. He left. She stood at the front of the empty classroom, and the rain that had been threatening all morning finally arrived audible against the window, and she stood in the sound of it, and she was exactly who she was. A Marine, an instructor, a woman who had made an impossible decision on a mountainside in a valley no one could cross, and had lived inside the consequences of that decision long enough to understand that the consequences were not separate from the decision that you carry both. That carrying both without dropping either is not a burden, but the specific gravity of having done something that mattered. The Silver Star was in a case in her quarters. The reprimand was in her service record. Ryan was leading a team somewhere she tried not to think about too much. Ortiz's daughter was 9 years old. 200 people were alive. And Emily Carter walked out of the classroom and into the rain, and toward the range where 23 students were waiting, carrying everything she was, which was exactly enough.